Okay, now, as I have to do, because this is just the kind of person I am, let's talk about the dark side of all this. I want to talk about some of the things about blogs that are, and so, well, let me say something I probably should say by way of wrapping up. So these things I've just talked about, communication, ways of accessing knowledge, ways of collaborating and producing new knowledge, ways of forming new kinds of social networks and social communities. I won't belabor the point, you can think this through yourself. All are transforming the kind of democracy that we have. The things I've just said match up and are meant to match up exactly with those characteristics from Dewey that I said at the beginning. The political structures of democracy are worthless or meaningless without. Today, increasingly, those elements, those social and cultural norms and practices I call, take place with and through, not exclusively, but increasingly, through the internet. And so the kind of democracy we have is partly shaped by the ways in which people use the internet to communicate, access information, share and produce information, and build social networks and communities. But there's a downside to this. And I'll give you an example, a real-life example. In 2004, soon after I started this blog, although I'd had the newsletter version, the email version, there was this election between John Kerry and George Bush. I was in Belgium during that time on a sabbatical, and so I was getting all my information through the internet and through the blogs and things that I was reading. The night of the election, I'd been doing the blog at that point for about a year, and I was getting a little tired of it, frankly. I would not have believed I'd still be doing it in 2010. I was getting a little tired of it, and since my main purpose in doing the blog was to smash the Bush administration and the Republicans every opportunity I could get, if John Kerry won, I was done. I missed it. And so I actually had prepared the mock-up page that was going to run on the day after the election, a picture of George Bush crying, and underneath, mission accomplished. And that was going to be my last posting of the blog. I mean, honestly. And I knew John Kerry was going to win, because everything that I was reading, all the polls, all the projections were saying Kerry's far ahead. This nincompoop in the White House couldn't possibly win. The plane thing had emerged. The Iraq War was going in the tank. This terrible thing at Abu Ghraib, had surfaced. And I mean, it was pretty, the economy was starting to turn bad too. So all those indicators that I was reading about every day told me Bush was doomed and Kerry was absolutely going to win. And literally the night before the election, I was already posting that final page that I was going to push the send button the next morning, and I was going to be done with the blog. Well, we all know that Kerry didn't win. But it made me wonder, how could I have been so wrong? Now, admittedly, it was a close election, and if Ohio had done it a different way, and I still believe there was fraud in Ohio, let's not talk about that. But at least on paper, George Bush won. How could I have been so wrong? Because I didn't even think it was going to be close. Well, I realized that the only things I was reading were resources from people who basically wanted what I wanted, and who basically agreed with me and looked at the world that I did. And even then, now, see, if I'd written about this, I'd be as famous as Cass Sunstein. It was pretty clear to me that part of what was happening was we were seeing this sort of echo chamber approach, that people on both ends of the political spectrum, and it's true on both the left and the right, were increasingly only reading, linking to, and connecting to blogs that basically shared the same worldview that they did. And so what you had is both a sort of a closed loop of information in which people are circulating and disseminating information that reinforces their views, but also a sort of the social dimension of that people sort of saying, oh yeah, Craig, you're absolutely right about that. And Craig says, Todd, you're absolutely right about that. And Todd says, Nick, you're absolutely right. And we all go, whoa, we're so much smarter than all those other people who don't get it, because we all know that we're right, And so that closed echo chamber was having some effects, effects that go exactly against some of the things I've just talked about. People weren't engaging and encountering radically different points of view. People weren't seeking out information that challenged or questioned their beliefs. They tended to seek out information, me, nobody else in this room, but I'll confess it, look for things that make us feel that we're right. And again, you have Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and the echo chamber on the right end of the spectrum as well. But the left is not protected from this. Cass Sunstein calls this the daily we, right? Isn't that his expression? And he actually became famous for writing about this. And I thought about it before he did, but I didn't write it. That in fact what's happening, and it's not just because of blogs, it's because of talk radio, it's because of TV channels. Raise your hand. How many people here watch Fox News on a daily basis, or even more than once a month?
Whenever we go to McDonald's to get ice cream cones.
That's right, they do it there, right.
They play Fox every time.
Okay.
All
How
the
many
time.
people watch MSNBC? How many people watch Keith Olbermann or Rachel Maddow, right? I mean, we know where to go for the news that we think is fair and balanced. We read Keith and we say, well, thank goodness somebody's finally showing both sides of the story, right? That's what we think, But the people who are watching Glenn Beck think exactly the same thing. Now, of course, we're right and they're wrong. But I have to, the sociologist in me has to get a little bit of a distance here and say, well, maybe there's something else happening that we're all part of, which is an increased polarization of our political discourse. Polarization, which is, I don't need to tell you, we all see this happening, also takes the form of a vicious rise in the tone with which, and again, I don't believe that it is entirely symmetrical. I had a link this morning from a teabagger saying, we want to eliminate the leftists from this country, okay? And you often hear Rush Limbaugh say, I don't want to win the argument with liberalism, I want to eliminate liberalism as a point of view in our society. Now, I don't know anybody on the left who says, I want to eliminate conservatives or the conservative point of view. We say, we're right and they're wrong, let's have the argument because we're going to win. They don't want to have the argument. They want to eliminate people who have a different point of view. And sometimes elimination takes on scary, especially these days. I don't want to belabor that point. The point is something seems to be happening to our political discourse, which I think is quite dangerous to our democracy. And blogs and talk radio and the nature of the internet is, like everything else I've said, making things worse as well as making things better. And one of the ways it's making things worse is by contributing to these closed communities of like-minded people who share information, reinforce amongst each other the assumption that they're right and everybody else is wrong, and actually close off the kind of discourse that Dewey thought was so important, that you have to have both intense bonds and connections with people who are like you, but also respectful civic engagements with people who are not like you. And the fact is, I really believe that we're losing that quality in our society, and especially in the last year or so, it seems as if we've almost abandoned that as a value. I don't want to exaggerate it, but sometimes I'm quite alarmed about that. Okay, let's talk about education. Let's come back to talk about education again, and then I'm going to wrap up in a minute. So, what role do I think technology has? See, now, I wrote technology in the classroom, but I'm going to question that in a second. Well, you know better than I, probably some of you I'm sure know better than I, the ways in which computers are being used in many classrooms. But I think that we're still basically using computers as a kind of standalone tool, as something to write with, as something to do sort of library research. Maybe you're running particular I'm thinking about teachers, school teachers, running particular software packages. Many schools don't connect their computers to the internet and don't want to connect their computers to the internet, or if they do, they put filters on them, which Tom Hollister I've written about, and Craig has written about, and others as well, which say, well, you can access the internet, but you can't really access all the internet. You can only access the safe parts. I understand where that comes from, but filters inevitably filter out too much. And so what they actually become is implicitly, maybe unintentionally, a medium of censorship, and not just a way of keeping kids safe. I've got young kids. I'm all for keeping kids safe too. I'm not sure filters do that. Tom Hollister told me a great story once where he actually visited a school where they had a brand new computer lab, at that point state of the art. He was walking through and looking at the machines, and he said, are these computers connected to the internet? And the person said, the principal, whoever was showing him, said, no, they're not. We don't want them connected to the internet Tom thought that was kind of bizarre, and he went and he sat down at one and did something and said, no, of course you are. Look, here's a web browser. You can access the web. And the person looked at was shocked and said, don't tell anybody.